Hi everyone, my name is Casey Montanay. I'm an instructional coach over at Shoemadill Middle School, and today I'm going to talk to you about DTGSS and ARC. As we go through today, you're going to learn a little bit about just what DTGSS is, a little bit about where it can overlap with your ARC work that you're already doing, and also how to actually get started with all of this. So before we get too far into this, I just want you to remember that it is only August. This is planting seeds of what the teacher evaluation system is. So I don't want you to be overly worried about the information here. The reason that I'm recording it is so that way you can go back to it whenever you need it throughout the year. And you'll see a link at the very end of this video for how to actually access all the slides. So to give you a little bit about what DTGSS actually is, if you have not heard of it yet, it is our new teacher evaluation system. It stands for Delaware Teacher Growth and Support System. It's meant to focus on growth rather than the final end point, which is something that teachers obviously value. So it's important to have this kind of system. With DTGSS, you will have growth goals. Your administrator and your instructional coaches will help support you in those goals, and your administrator will observe you at least 3 times every year, even if you're an experienced educator. And the reason being, they're coming in to see your growth over time in your specific growth goal area. In terms of what you actually enter into DSC, you'll enter in your goals, and I'll explain the different kinds of goals in a minute. There is a mid-year conference form for you to fill out, which notes your progress, and then a self-evaluation form at the end. With the 2 goals, there are 2 different kinds of goals. You have your professional growth goals, and this is based on a new framework, which I'll show you in a few moments. This is the area where admin will conduct walkthroughs based on that goal, and your coaches will give you some formative feedback throughout the year. Your student improvement goals will feel very familiar, so I'll actually go into those first because I don't want you to be too overwhelmed, and seeing them first may help. It is still undergoing revisions, those student improvement goals, so know that in another year or 2 that may look a little bit different. Over on the right side of my screen here, you can see basically a summary of what the framework is. I've condensed it down just to some of the key words so that way it's not so much for you to look at. And we'll get into that on a larger screen in just a few. One item on this screen that may help you, right here where it says overview, if you come into the actual slides, you'll be able to click on that and it'll open up a document where my former math coach and I summarized DTGSS and broke down all the parts. That might be something helpful to print and just have on hand. So talking about the 2 kinds of goals that you have. The first is student improvement goals. I'll call them student goals just to shorten it up. This will feel a lot like DPAS for those of you who have been through that system before. With the student improvement goals, there are 3 measures, just like with DPAS, measures A, B, and C. For ELA specifically, which is all of you if you're looking at this, since you are the people who are using the ARC curriculum, you have 2 measures, either measure A and B or 2 measure Bs. For those who don't remember what that means, a measure A is your state assessment scores. A measure B is content assessments. In the past, we used to pull assessments off of Performance Plus for those measure Bs. Sometimes people use things like iReady for measure B. But measure B, I'll show you some options that might tie a little more closely to ARC and the work that you're doing there. Just like with DPAS, student attendance needs to be at 85% or better to count towards these goals, and you need at least 10 students in your data collection group. The biggest change here from DPAS is that everyone gets a summative every single year with DTGSS. So even if you were to go on a leave, for example, maternity leave, you would still need to complete these student improvement goals as well as the other goals. But that is the biggest change. So remember, as an ELA teacher, you are essentially choosing measure A and B, so your state assessment plus a content assessment, or 2 measure Bs. With your measure Bs, some things to consider with ARC is you have so much data with ARC. Your ELA could be a really good pre-test, post-test option, especially if you couple it with power goals, because you could think about what progress students are making towards another level on their ELA. Your conferencing data, again, if it's coupled with power goals, and I'll show you what that could look like. ARC, you're collecting so much data. Use the data to help fuel those student goals. Some of the teachers at SHU last year created a spreadsheet to track their ELA and power goals. There's a lot of data you can also just pull from the system, but if you have something nice and neat in Excel, you can always upload it at the end of the year to prove that your students have met those goals. So that might be a thought as you move forward. An example of something to think about, you could say something like 70% of students will grow one ELA level and or progress towards the next ELA level by meeting 2 related power goals. So that gives you a little flexibility because it is them growing an ELA level or moving up, working towards their next ELA level by meeting power goals. And that shows you an example of what meeting a goal could look like. And exceeds is really simple. It's more than with the rest of the same statement you already had. This is just something that could serve as an example of how the ELA might lend itself as a good measure B student goal. Okay, this is the one that's going to take a little longer to talk about because the professional growth goals are going to feel really new. When I talk to my staff about these, I like to call them teacher goals because it's much more focused on you and what you are doing. The teacher goals are broken into 3 parts, essentially 3 essential questions that focus on your learning environment, your engagement in learning, and maximizing learning. You can kind of think of them as going from more simple to complex. Each of these pieces are broken down further on the framework, which goes back to that table I showed you earlier. And the framework is really meant to be a guide for where you might write your goals. So, when we talk about the framework, again, this is my summary of the framework here. You'll notice learning environment is broken down into 3 parts: structures for learning, positive classroom environment or climate, and equitable access. And then engagement in learning, maximizing learning are also broken down in the same way. My suggestion for newer teachers is to spend some time in that learning environment category and decide where might you want to focus on something to really get your environment where you want it to be. It doesn't mean that a more veteran teacher couldn't focus there. We always get a really tough class, for example, where we need to redo something with our climate because it's not working. That might be an area of focus if you have a group where you're struggling. What's going to happen is you will take a look at a rubric, and the rubric is linked here, again, for those who want to come back to the slides, and it talks about different levels for each of those areas. So on the rubric, the biggest thing you'll notice is level 1, there's limited success for student learning. Level 2, there's a plan, but it's not really executed. Level 3, you're really meeting the expectation, for example, for a climate, your class climate. Level 4 would be exceeding expectations, and that normally involves the students doing something where they are really doing the heavy lifting. When you write your goal, one of my suggestions for my staff last year was take a look at the rubric at the beginning of the year, decide if you're working in climate, for example, where do you fall on the rubric? What level are you now? And then set a goal to move up a level, maybe 2, if you feel like you can get there. And think about what data you could collect to prove that you're making that progress. I'll show you how you might write that goal, but just know that the rubric is there as a good resource for you. When you actually write your teacher goal, there are kind of 2 ways you can think about it. The first will feel more like the student goal. It's growth based on data. So you might say something like increasing the amount of accountable student discourse from X to Y, okay? You could also look at it as growth on the rubric, where you say, I want to move from a level 2 to a level 3. Both of those would be good goals. Why do those goals work? The biggest reason is that they have a baseline. You'll see that highlighted in yellow. You'll see the expected growth, which I accidentally did not highlight here. So this level 3 should be green, where the expected growth is, as well as what is actually going to grow. What evidence will there be? This information would be entered into DSC in the professional growth priority box. Your coach will go over this with you more, but essentially in that box, you're going to put the performance area. So for example, that might be learning environment, and then next to learning environment, you'd write what your actual goal is. Your professional growth goals can overlap with ARC as well. You might want to think about, is there an area of the framework that applies to what you're doing with power goals or conferencing? And again, is there any data you're already collecting through ARC that supports your area of focus? Over on the left side of the screen, this underlined information here is a link to possible data sources, and it's all split up by the area of focus in the framework. Just as a reminder for what would come for the rest of the year, you would set your goals, your admin would walk through, and they'll give you some more details on what CEIAs actually look like. For those who have done improvement work before, it feels a little like a PDSA. You'll get formative feedback from your coaches. There's a mid-year conference form and a self-evaluation form. The self-evaluation form does require you to rate yourself using the rubric in each of the 9 areas. So even though you are focusing in on one area, your admin will still comment on the other areas, and you will still self-evaluate in the other areas by the end of the year. This would also be where you would upload any data you have. So if you've been logging pre-post test data for students, you can upload that. You can also upload any data that you have to support your teacher growth. A quick aside, I know that measurement can feel tricky for people. A really good way to think about it is think about it like an I can or an objective. You wouldn't say something like students will understand X because you wouldn't know how. You want to avoid verbs that aren't observable, that aren't measurable. On the slides here, I have just some examples of what those goals can look like, and these all came from staff at my school, initially what their goal started as versus the stronger goal where they really thought about what is my baseline, where do I want to grow, what is it that's actually growing. So you'll see the items that are better goals have the highlights in it. I won't read them to you here, but they are available. That was a lot of information. So when you think about where to actually start with DTGSS, a couple of things. Number one, there's a self-reflection tool and it's linked here. And essentially what it is thinking about what areas of the framework makes you feel anxious or stressed. That would be a good area of focus. There's an optional template which would help you draft your teacher goal. It mirrors what you input into DSC. So if you're someone who maybe struggles with inputting things in DSC, that might be a good starting point to do it on paper first. Again, the link is in the original slides. You could also think about what connections you have to ARC, the data you're already collecting. And finally, you might just want to think about what data do I have what goals might I have personally, where could they overlap, and think about where you might focus so you can grow. So the only reason I'm not here today is I'm doing a fellowship this year, so I am MIA for a school year, but you can still feel free to contact me, email me. I can answer questions about any of this. Scan the QR code for access to the original slides.